I was originally a strong man on Earth, who has protected mankind for millions of years, but I was trapped in a dark cage and experienced 9 reincarnations. However, the erosion of darkness not only did not erase my nature, but also helped me become a creature comparable to the heavens, but it also caused me to only stay in it. Once the darkness disappears, it will turn into a demon that kills everyone. Only because of my years in the Valley of Chaos, I became the first point of mankind after the formation of the Great Realm. What I passed allowed mankind to stand on top of all races in the starry sky for the first time. Feeling invincible, I began to travel around the world and finally found a starry sky dam, deep in the universe. I could feel that the darkness would swallow me completely for 5,000 years. The only way to solve this problem was to wait for the blood of my descendants. Suddenly, there was a pillar emitting a neon color in the middle. This was an abyss that could seal a person without decay for millions of years. There was a woman's neck wall inside the pillar in a green dress. She looked very beautiful and cold to the extreme. At this time, the woman in the abyss suddenly opened her eyes. The next second, he shook his hand and smashed it into pieces, then completely climbed out of the abyss. But he immediately frowned, because after so long, his strength has now completely disappeared. He awakened the holy body at birth and defeated hundreds of millions of geniuses in the chaotic ancient times. With his great holy body, he was invincible. Even the Lord of the Forbidden Zone was invincible, born in the wrong era. His father, Changkong, the emperor, pushed hundreds of millions of opponents across the starry sky, conquered all races, swept the vast forbidden area, and became truly invincible, became an emperor under my brilliance, so I sealed him in the abyss of the gods. I just waited for the future Golden Master to meet again, when the road to immortality was opened after eternity. I have agreed with him all over the world. He found that the pavilion where the Supreme was beheaded, like the rain, has stopped. Let him pay more attention to where my father is. Where are you now? Why are you looking at the land you created with your own hands? I have recovered. I will definitely find you, and I will find out who destroyed it. Then he sat cross-legged on the ground and began to work. The immortal goblin that I created through deduction. At that time, I saw the spiritual energy throughout the cave, sweeping from all directions. Finally, it turned into a tidal wave and poured into his body continuously. Half a month passed, in the blink of an eye. The spiritual power in the cave sky had been swallowed by Li Changying, legged in the void, with colorful divine light blooming all over his body. Exuding a majestic soul breath like an ancient sacred mountain, he slowly opened his eyes, calmed the breath in his body, and then slowly fell to the ground like an ordinary person. Unfortunately, the spiritual energy here has been lost too much over the endless years, and in order to help, I have spent more than half of my time in the prison of the original god. He has not even recovered to the Shaocheng level. Li Changying shook his head and sighed. He once reached the peak of the holy body, and his cultivation level was even more immeasurable. Moreover, with his imperial weapon Xuantian Jushao at that time, he could win, although it was accurate. But now his cultivation level has only recovered 1/10,000th. It has been time to decline to this point. The next moment, Li Changying took one step and crossed thousands of miles. One more step left the ruins of hell. He was once known to the world. I am called the Great Emperor of Heaven, not because I suddenly became enlightened, but because I have my own family. Back then, Li Zhu got a chicken and a dog and then ascended to heaven, because of the fact that I became emperor. There are almost half of the powerful people in the clan. This background is enough to allow the earth to live for many years without the birth of a great emperor, and it should have happened in the 10th century. What was it like tens of thousands of years ago? So Li Changying must know what happened in these hundreds of thousands of years. Asked about a great emperor who had just been found, and the servant saw that the person who came was a beautiful girl, respectfully replied. Guessed, 200,000 years ago. After gathering the heavenly emperor, he became the emperor and formed the most powerful force in the Xuanwang realm today. He gathered the imperial palace in Wenyan. Li Changying thought hard. Has something to do with the collapse of the empire. Then he asked the maid again. Li Zhu heard this sentence and the maid changed her previous smile to horror. Guest, are you from Li Zhu? Hearing this sentence, Li Changying was stunned for a moment, but he immediately realized that I was not just asking casually. After asking Wen Yan, the maid was relieved and then said in a low voice that Li Zhu was the strongest sinner among all Zhu, but he had just reached the innate realm. Wen Yan Li Changying's face became serious again. He immediately asked, why did he call Li Zhu a sinner, only to see the maid whisper again. Under guard and not allowed to appear with the strong people above Zhu Ji. As for the reason, it seems that there was a strong person in Li Zhu before, but that strong person seemed to have gone crazy, killing many sects. Finally, he was suppressed by the joint efforts of many aristocratic families. Since then, Li Zhu has been guarded. Hearing this, a cold light flashed in Li Changying's eyes. Although the race is not at the peak of Xuanwang, it will last forever. But now the race is considered a villain. Whatever the reason, when I know the truth, everyone will be curious. Li Changying and the maid asked for Li Zi's address and then rushed to Yanlongzhou, which was 100,000 miles away. The next morning he stopped at an ancient city 10 miles away, looked at the mileage written on the city, and looked at the people passing by. Li Changying's heart was full of complexity. He could feel it. Such blood came from the same bloodline. Although most of this group of people had no cultivation, and even their bloodlines were very thin, they were Li Zi's people, and even these people in front of them could be regarded as his descendants. For a moment, Li Changying's eyes were relaxed. What exactly happened? He walked towards the city. On the side of the road, a ragged woman with messy hair, who seemed to be only 11 or 12 years old, fell to the ground. Only her weak breath could prove that she was alive. Seeing this scene, sighed, then picked up the little girl and injected a burst of vitality into the girl's body. Not long after, the girl turned around and saw the elder sister holding her. My sister saved my life, and Li Changying asked, why are you here? Your family, your father and mother, they all died in the hands of the Yanlong clan. He could feel the little girl. The blood of the Li clan was much richer than other members of the Li clan. If the Li clan was at its peak, she must be a genius. If he had not met her, he would have turned his head to the side and cried. But Li Changying could see it. There were 9 chains condensed by mana. Deep inside, the girl's blood was used to suppress the practice of blood confinement. With a race like the Li clan that was extremely submissive to the blood of the earth, Li Changying was stopped as he stepped forward. Boy, you can't go in here. You have to go back. Changying ignored him and just looked at the tower in front of him quietly. You really can't get into the bottom of Li Zi's mirror. The soldier continued, and Li Changying nodded, then turned and left. But the next second, he appeared in the ancestral temple and was colder as he walked. Angry, I saw one after another spiritual tablets on the walls of the ancestral temple. Li Zhu, a native of Chenjia village, Chen Shuhua, 33 years old, Haodian Zhang Shijing fought bloody battles with the Kraken, and 32 people died. The spiritual tablets were so dense that it was impossible to see them all at a glance. They were all trying to gain a foothold, and their cultivation level was generally at the Haodian Zhang Shijing level or even in the hidden Qi stage, but they all shone brightly to gain a foothold. Li Changying clenched his fists, and his heart was filled with killing intent. On the floor of the ancestral temple, there was a white-haired and wrinkled old man sitting cross-legged on a futon. In front of him was a portrait. When looking at the portrait, Li Changying's face suddenly moved because he saw the portrait. She was a woman. She was very graceful. She was wearing a green dress. She held the handle tightly in her hand. The scene did not match her temperament at all. The woman was Li Changying. Who are you? At this time, the old man also felt Li Changying's arrival. He turned his head and asked, and at the same time opened his turbid old eyes. He immediately froze in place. It looked very similar. He had been sitting in the ancestral temple for 500 years, observing the portrait day and night, and had long been included in the portrait, his soul. Although the woman standing in front of him was not as beautiful as Fengshen in the portrait, she was not so mysterious. He pointed to the portrait and told him very seriously that this was the Li clan, also the only chance for the Li clan to stand up. The woman in the portrait would return in the future to lead the entire Li clan, and regain its glory. But the master did not know. He said that what my master told me back then was true. Their lineage had been guarding this portrait for many years, waiting for the woman's return, but not hers. Zhang Tianji's eyes dimmed slightly. The woman in the portrait should have been there long ago, just a coincidence. The woman in front of me happened to be similar to the portrait. At this moment, Li Changying appeared in front of the portrait. He was stroking it with trembling hands. The eyes of this portrait were slightly red. This was what his father said in his heart. Li Changying asked in a low voice, "Where did you get this painting from? This is the most precious thing in my family. It is impossible to know how the painting was passed down. That my master told me before he died. The woman in the portrait will definitely return. I have to wait for my master to say that her return will bring our Li clan to the top again, and regain the glory that belongs to our Li clan. And I have waited for 500 years. Li Changying suddenly felt annoyed. Why did he have to be sealed in the divine garden? Such a long period of time has caused the Li clan's situation to decline. At this moment, and there were 3,000 green silk threads draped behind him, blooming with green light. Her temperament had changed drastically. The goddess-like Zhang Tianji who walked out of the moon palace instantly looked like a bolt of lightning. Li Changying was stopped as he stepped forward. Boy, you can't go in here. You have to go back. Changying ignored him and just looked at the tower in front of him quietly. You really can't get into the bottom of Li Zi's mirror. The soldier continued, and Li Changying nodded, then turned and left. But the next second, he appeared in the ancestral temple and was colder as he walked. Angry, I saw one after another spiritual tablets on the walls of the ancestral temple. Li Zhu, a native of Chenjia village, Chen Shuhua, 33 years old, Haodian Zhang Shijing fought bloody battles with the Kraken, and 32 people died. The spiritual tablets were so dense that it was impossible to see them all at a glance. They were all trying to gain a foothold, and their cultivation level was generally at the Haodian Zhang Shijing level or even in the hidden qi stage, but they all shone brightly to gain a foothold. Li Changying clenched his fists, and his heart was filled with killing intent. On the floor of the ancestral temple, there was a white-haired and wrinkled old man sitting cross-legged on a futon. In front of him was a portrait. When looking at the portrait, Li Changying's face suddenly moved because he saw the portrait. She was a woman. She was very graceful. She was wearing a green dress. She held the handle tightly in her hand. The scene did not match her temperament at all. The woman was Li Changying. Who are you? At this time, the old man also felt Li Changying's arrival. He turned his head and asked, and at the same time opened his turbid old eyes. He immediately froze in place. It looked very similar. He had been sitting in the ancestral temple for 500 years, observing the portrait day and night, and had long been included in the portrait, his soul. Although the woman standing in front of him was not as beautiful as Fengshen in the portrait, she was not so mysterious. He pointed to the portrait and told him very seriously that this was the Li clan, also the only chance for the Li clan to stand up. The woman in the portrait would return in the future to lead the entire Li clan, and regain its glory. But the master did not know. He said that what my master told me back then was true. Their lineage had been guarding this portrait for many years, waiting for the woman's return, but not hers. Zhang Tianji's eyes dimmed slightly. The woman in the portrait should have been there long ago, just a coincidence. The woman in front of me happened to be similar to the portrait. At this moment, Li Changying appeared in front of the portrait. He was stroking it with trembling hands. The eyes of this portrait were slightly red. This was what his father said in his heart. Li Changying asked in a low voice, "Where did you get this painting from? This is the most precious thing in my family. It is impossible to know how the painting was passed down. That my master told me before he died. The woman in the portrait will definitely return. I have to wait for my master to say that her return will bring our Li clan to the top again, and regain the glory that belongs to our Li clan. And I have waited for 500 years. Li Changying suddenly felt annoyed. Why did he have to be sealed in the divine garden? Such a long period of time has caused the Li clan's situation to decline. At this moment and there were 3,000 green silk threads draped behind him, blooming with green light. Her temperament had changed drastically. The goddess-like Zhang Tianji who walked out of the moon palace instantly looked like a bolt of lightning. "It's you, it's really you, you're finally back." She cried so hard that she thought she would never be able to wait for the return of the woman in the painting, but she didn't expect such a day to come. Although she didn't know who he was, she waited for Li Changying's return. But it had been her long-cherished wish. What happened to the Li clan in these years? Who made the Li clan become like this? But Zhang Tianji shook his head, then tremblingly took out an ancient book from his arms and handed it to Li Changying, which Li Zuli read. Li Changying took the ancient book No Joy No Sadness and opened it. That in the 639,564th year of the Xuanwang calendar, the cavalry formation had a 10,000-foot tall god. After Han Tianxian arrived, he pointed his finger in the air and Li Zu's soul disappeared. One can build its foundation. When that happened, Li Zu had a population of 10,000 and a soul of 3,693 nodes was 220. Among the 9, 3 of them were beheaded, and one of them, Li Changying, saw the blazing fire. Anger burned in his eyes, almost condensing into substance and igniting the void. He could express the will of heaven and earth to suppress Li Zu. All the strong men were at least Hunyuan saints, strong men of the same level, immediately asked, "Who did this?" Wenyan Zhang Tianji shook his head. "I don't know. It's been too long. Over the years, our Li Zu has been bullied and humiliated. Many inheritances and ancient books have been bullied and humiliated, destroyed again and again." Li Changying's words were lost and he nodded. It has now been more than 830,000 years in the Xuanwang calendar. 200,000 years have passed since that incident. When he fell asleep, Emperor Xuanwang hadn't even started counting, so he had slept for at least 80 years. "Father, where have you been for thousands of years? Why did you ignore Li Zu when he fell into such a state?" Li Changying closed his eyes slightly. "When he was sealed by me and entered the source of God, I was still at the peak of his power. At that time, Emperor Chengkong ascended to heaven. Invincible on earth, all the stars in the sky, all the feet up and down, but I don't want him to sleep. Millions of years later, the invincible heavenly emperor has completely disappeared, and Li Zu, who was very powerful at that time, has fallen into such a situation can know some of Zhang Tianji's wishes." After saying that, Li Changying, the East China Sea royal family, had a cold light flashing in his eyes. The China Sea region for 200,000 years. Calculating the time, we, Li Zu, are still the East China Sea royal family, after the fall of the East China Sea. The reshuffle of power is indeed serious, but the East China Sea royal family is still high, ignoring everything. There must be a strong backer behind him, maybe they can know a little about what happened back then. In an instant, Li Changying nodded, and then he was about to attack the East China Sea royal family first. Zhang Tianji said with some worry, "Your Majesty Goddess, the East China Sea royal family is sitting in the East China Sea. 200,000 yuan is unpredictable. It is said that the current East China Sea king is already trying to break through the Yuanshan. I am afraid it is not easy to investigate and needs to be considered in the long term." Li Changying shook his head, his eyes full of confidence, has not yet become Yuanshan. Even if he has mastered the soul and achieved the cutting knife, so what if he is just a chicken and a dog in my eyes? Zhang Tianji looked at the extraordinary woman in front of him, and the curiosity in his heart became more and more intense. What is her identity? In his opinion, even if she is ranked in the top 10 geniuses on the Qianlong list, his curiosity is so strong that he can't suppress it. Can't help but ask, "Your Majesty Goddess, who are you and what is the Li clan like?" Li Changying spoke with his hands behind his back. Walking towards the highest level roof. Zhang Tianji followed behind you are a descendant of the Li clan. You certainly know how shocking and glorious the Li clan once had. Li Changying stood on the roof and looked down at the ground. He slowly said that the Li clan once stood on the peak of the starry sky. When the words fell, Zhang Tianji's eyes widened in Wenyan's eyes. There was even more chaos in his heart. 3,000 green hair fluttered and her robe also fluttered. I am the legitimate daughter of the strong man of the Li clan. I have fought with the stars in the universe and the invincible holy body of the Forbidden Zone is immortal. I was stunned. Fighting with the stars. What is this? Even the weakest Starry Sky clan can defeat any strong person and completely annihilate the Li clan. They aren't the lords of the Forbidden Zone. Fighting is a character that only exists in legends. The legendary lord of the Forbidden Zone has existed for centuries. The great emperor cut himself with a sword. He is still the great emperor. He is able to fight the lord of the Forbidden Zone. At this moment, his breathing could not help but quicken. Do not become faster is already at your peak. Li Changying there was no joy or sadness on his face, and he spoke indifferently. This holy body was considered Hunyuani. Zhang Tianji was completely stagnant in place. It appeared anywhere in his 500 years of life. I have never heard of a holy body, even a Zun body. Once such a genius appears, many great religions will fight for it and even start a war for it at a cost. And the girl in front of me turned out to be a holy body. Da Cheng is a strong person at the great sage level at the peak of Hunyuan and suppresses all races in the starry sky. She said that she was the direct daughter of the most powerful person in the Li clan. So, what kind of cultivation is the most powerful person in the Li clan? Trembling and even shedding tears. Zhang Tianji couldn't help but ask Her Majesty the Goddess, who is your father? He wanted to confirm an idea in his heart. Li Changying's heart was burning with anger for the Li clan. I don't know. It's just a name. Even my father doesn't know about the mastermind behind this. I must kill him. The name of Emperor Li Changkong is the most famous in the 9 heavens and 10 earths. No one in the entire universe knows it. Even after 1,000,000 years, even the future generations of the Li clan don't know his name, which is really embarrassing. After hearing Li Changying's words, Zhang Tianji's eyes showed a hint of darkness. Yes, it is the younger generation who does not live up to expectations. History has lost too much, and now even the great emperor I don't even know his name anymore. Didn't you see that the current great emperor of the Xuanwang realm, Sakyamuni, had a great emperor millions of years ago, and he still called himself the great emperor? I don't know anything, Li Changying, Shen Sheng said. Please remember, my ancestor of the Li clan had a great emperor. At that time, the Li clan was very powerful and was respected as the #1 king of all the clans in the starry sky. There were many masters such as Tianzhao. All the glory of Lingli was because of that great emperor. Even now, 1,000,000 years later, he may not have completely fallen. A light flashed in his eyes. Zhang Tianji sat directly on the ground, his eyes full of fear, and his heart was turbulent. In the stormy waves, if someone else told him that the ancestor of the Li clan had a great emperor, he would not believe it at all. Li Changying believed it very much. The ancestor of the Li clan actually had a great emperor, and his descendant son Bushao was very lonely. In the name of the great emperor, Zhang Tianji cried directly. Li Changying described the scene, he felt that he missed it. Then seeing the current Li clan in a sad state, all kinds of embarrassing emotions swept through his heart. Meeting the ancestor of the Li clan, but this was not his fault. His bloodline was restricted when he was born. It was already very difficult to achieve his own innate perfection was extraordinary. But Li Changying did not believe that the great emperor was not dead. Who could only seal an existence below the great emperor? This was a generally accepted theorem of survival. There was only one way, and that was to commit suicide and become the lord of the Forbidden Zone. Every few 100,000 years, he would take action to harvest endless life energy to extend his lifespan. The Li clan wanted to live forever, he could only do this. But doing this was equivalent to becoming the leader of the entire world. Enemy, he did not believe that his ancestors would do such a thing. A little complicated when he saw Zhang Tianji's appearance. You don't have to blame yourself. It's not your fault that the Li family fell into this state today. It's also not your fault. I will cooperate with him slowly during the calculation process. He also remembered how glorious and powerful the Li clan was at that time before he was sealed into the source of the gods. Compared to today, it is like heaven and earth. Father wants to live forever, then there are only two ways. The first is to become the lord of the forbidden area, and the other is to live a second life. There is no other way not to become the lord of the forbidden area. Li Changying understood Li Changkong's character and he became the emperor. The first thing he did was to attack the forbidden area. He and the owner of the forbidden area were mortal enemies in the starry sky, because of the intrusion of the forbidden area. It can be said that the whole world owed him a favor from the Li family back then, but the Li family has fallen into such a situation today. It is terrible for anyone to help. However, if Li Changkong does not become the lord of the forbidden area, then he has only one choice, which is to live a second life. This is too illusory. The legend only has the oldest era and even the world is able to bring many emperors. However, even in such a glorious situation, it was extremely difficult to live a second life as an emperor. It was even more difficult than becoming an immortal in an era when the path to immortality had not been cut off. Although Li Changying had absolute confidence in Li Changkong's talent, he had to keep it in his heart. It was a big question mark, but Li Changying had an intuition that he must still be alive, but for some reason, he completely disappeared from this world and never appeared again at the peak in the future, and then slowly searched for life and death. He wanted to see his soul, but before that, he had to let the name of Emperor Changkong resound throughout the world again. This time, Zhang Tianji stood up and asked excitedly. He finally calmed his heartbeat and could barely speak. There was a hint of reminiscence and admiration on Li Changying's face. Although he had always been indifferent, he felt a little excited when he mentioned this name. The great Emperor of Heaven has traversed the world in 1,000,000 years. There are hundreds of millions of living beings, but no one recognizes me. Years passed, the stars moved across the sea, and millions of years later, a goddess called out the name of the sky with the celestial beings. At this point, the name of the place began to appear. Xuanwang Fengdong and the White Bow passed by in a hurry. That month, Li Changying handed Tang Qianchen to Zhang Tianji and asked him to start cultivating for her. Tang Qianchen's cultivation talent exploded after Li Changying unlocked her bloodline shackles. It was quite terrifying. She would become invisible. After the weapon cultivation reached the great perfection, Li Changying taught her the Hunyuan Hongmeng Sutra, a secret technique of the Li clan that was not passed down at that time by the Hunyuan saint. Even the original Li Changkong had practiced this before he became his younger brother. After a skill was mastered, he combined what he had learned with his own Taoism to create his own emperor-level skill. The immortal emperor's essence and Tang Qianchen's cultivation talent had been fully discovered. Now, in just 2 months, she has cultivated her acquired realm to the great perfection, and just yesterday she broke through to the innate realm. A true spiritual genius has appeared in the Li clan now, and she may be able to break through. The news that the Li clan's blood curse has broken through the Shenzang realm and even spread higher is changing. For a time, the Li clan has attracted many spies. The Li clan, which was originally a little stable, has now become turbulent again. At this time, the Li clan has become unstable. Watching the show and want to see what the Li clan does to protect this unawakened spiritual genius. And what Li Changying wants is this result. It is too troublesome to go to them one by one and kill them, might as well let the others go. After all, after he slaughtered the first big clan, the other sects will definitely find out and run away too, looking for an opportunity to let them go. They themselves came to the door, and Tang Qianchen was the hook he released. Li Changying did not know how many big fish this hook could catch, he would kill them all. And among the entire Li clan, only Zhang Tianji knew about Li Changying's existence. If the secret was not leaked, it would be impossible for others to know. Today, there is a peak powerhouse in the Li clan. At this time, the courtyard door was knocked, and the voice of Her Majesty Goddess Zhang Tianji came in. Li Changying reached the door and pushed it open with a respectful look and then handed over a copy. After looking at the list, Li Changying turned out to be the racial sect that began to oppress our Li clan after the news of Tang Qianchen came out. Li Changying nodded. There were a dozen in total on the list. For him, the sects and races were nothing more than chickens and ditches. The strongest person was just a chicken to retreat to Li City and order them to go down recently. Don't come out. I want to see how many sects and races will come. Li Changying's eyes flashed with killing intent. He didn't want the Li clan to suffer too many casualties. Although there were casualties, as far as he knew, the current population of the Li people was about 10 million, it was not too much to barely enter Li City, they could enter. As for how many people would be affected by this during the migration process, Li Changying didn't care if he died the enemy of the Li clan forever. In order to bring the Li clan back to its peak, this was not about the Virgin Mary. There were sacrifices in the process of revival. It was normal for Her Highness Goddess Zhang Tianji to nod, and then she hesitated to say something. What's wrong? Li Changying asked Her Highness Goddess. Although there were no good things in the Li clan's treasure house, there were some ancient objects stored in it. Zhang Tianji said slowly. At this time, he also understood that Li Changying should have just recovered from the divine source and his strength had not yet returned to its peak. Although there was no natural medicine in the Li clan's treasure house, there were still some treasures. Maybe they could. It helps the goddess. Then, take me to see it. Li Changying was interested in her language. Li Changying walked alone in the house. The Li clan's treasures were all rubbish. For ordinary life, it may be a treasure for practitioners like Ji, but for him, it was just rubbish and was useless. As for the history of each of those old objects, it had only existed for tens of thousands, years at most. There was no existence related to them. Li Changying sighed. In the past, the Li clan's treasure house contained all kinds of top-notch medicines and magical artifacts. He was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly froze. The next moment, his eyes widened. He reached out and moved, and a piece of broken iron came out of the pile of debris of the spear tip. It had been completely damaged. It seemed to be made of van iron, but it had a sense of vicissitudes of time. It seemed to carry some kind of heavy history heaven's halberd. Li Changying's eyes were full of complexity. This was the Xuantian 9 heavens halberd that he personally made, after breaking through the great sage by collecting various divine iron minerals, splitting the void and piercing the galaxy. However, he had changed into this appearance now. Li Changying could feel that the mitzvah spirit born from the Xuantian Jushao halberd that he refined back then had disappeared. There was no aura of the Mudjak spirit on the halberd, but even though it was badly damaged, it was still a quasi-emperor warrior of the sword-cutting king. What have you gone through to break even? Li Changying's expression was very complicated. Back then, he gave the Xuantian 9 heavens halberd to a junior he valued, but didn't want to see him again. They went back upstairs together. Li Changying held it. The small spear that stayed in the room said softly. Dark clouds pressed down on the city. The world seemed to have fallen into a state of silence, endless oppression. The people of the Red Spirit tribe came quickly to the city, and one after another they heard a shrill roar. The rapid roar came one after another. Looking from the sky to the ground, you can see that the Li people are like ants, rushing towards Li City frantically, enough to make hundreds of horses gallop along the city gate road. At this moment, everything seems a bit crowded. Zhang Tianji stood on the city wall and looked into the distance with a slightly solemn expression. There was a large army dozens of miles away, rushing towards Li City like a tide. At a glance, there were at least hundreds of thousands of troops. The Skilling tribe, the Li tribe's mortal enemy, borders the Li tribe, and the two races are not very strong. Among the Skilling tribe, the true sovereign of Skilling is also in the innate realm of Dzogchen. However, the difference is that the true sovereign, Skilling, is younger than him by many years and his life has come to an end. If the usual attack is the Skilling tribe army, he must be prepared, let alone the Skilling tribe, even Yanlongzhou. The governor of the Yanlong clan, the Yanlong god, is here, and he will not take it seriously, fell to lay the foundation for the rise of our Li clan. Zhang Tianji used something that only he could hear. The voice murmured in a low voice. What the great elder was talking about asked with a very serious expression. He was none other than Li Xiao, the strongest person in the Li clan except Zhang Tianji, with 100 years of innate cultivation. In advanced cultivation, he has protected the Li tribe from foreign invasion for 200 years. If he does not have strong blood and strong bones, he will not be able to break through to the placement realm in this life. If there is nothing to do, please go down and guard everyone and immediately activate the city defense. The formation is ready to face the enemy. Zhang Tianji shook his head and said, also standing on the tower. He looked at the sky in the distance, his eyes full of worry. At this time, the thick dark clouds in the distance began to come. Standing there was a giant with a height of several hundred feet, a red flag with countless runes and spells engraved on it, and a red beard handed Tang Qianshan. I will spare you, and the Li clan will not destroy the giant. Standing in the void, the Red Spirit King wants me, the Li clan, to win, but you are not qualified. Li Xiao roared and then turned into a black light, rising from the ground and slashing at the Red Spirit King in the sky, which was dozens of feet away. The sword energy tore through the clouds. The dazzling sun shone and the sharp sword energy disturbed the vitality at the base of the surrounding rocks. The king sneered and just flicked his finger, causing a tremor in the void. The next moment, Li Xiao turned into a meteor. Li Xiao hit the city wall heavily and spat out a mouthful of blood. Turbulent waves rose in his heart. He had broken through the casting machine mirror. His tone was filled with doubt. He had fought against the Sekare king more than once. With this kind of strength, the only thing you can do is to cast the machine mirror. Otherwise, how would I dare to come to you and cause trouble for the Li clan? A roar of thunder instantly shattered the dark cloud layer. The sun set on the earth, but it was shining. The people of the bright Li clan only felt cold. The strongest among the Li clan, Grand Elder Zhang Tianji, was only innate perfection. How could he be the opponent of the Red Spirit King? He was the Red Spirit King. Tianyuan with just one glance. Although you are strong, a powerful city defense formation for 10,000 years, but you have just entered the casting machine. It is ridiculous to break through the Li clan's formation. Zhang Tianji said in an old and cold voice. Just hope that more strong people can come. How arrogant they are now, how regretful they will be when Her Majesty the Goddess takes action later. The Li clan's city defense formation. You do have something. Of course, I can't break it alone. How do you know that I came here alone? The Red Spirit King sneered, then turned around and raised his bow and arrow somewhere in the void, and asked Elder Guanjian to take action. He sighed and looked at Zhang Tianji above Li Cheng. I really admire your loyalty, Guanjian, Zhang Tianji, Moonsword Pavilion. Please hand over the holy girl of the Li clan. At the same time, I can promise you that the Red Spirit clan will never take action against the Li clan. With a miserable tone, Zhang Tianji's pupils shrank slightly when he saw the visitor. Ugn Pavilion, rumored to have broken through to the realm of the burial of the gods 300 years ago. He is a famous strong man in Yanlongzhou. If it were not for Her Majesty the Goddess, the Li clan would really do this time. It's over, but it's not enough now. Elder Guanjian, I, the Li clan, have no grievances against you, Yuzhong Pavilion. Why do you want to humiliate me? The Li clan says that being weak is a sin. Stop talking nonsense and hand over the holy girl of the Li clan. Otherwise, after the city is destroyed, kill them all, Guanjian said coldly. Elder, or let me go roll up the dark clouds. In the distance and the strong men stood in the void with complicated expressions and said firmly. At this time, Tang Qianchen was wearing a purple cloud pattern. Her entire body of robe was emitting a faint purple light, completely different from the look that Li Changying took on the roadside 3 months ago. You or me. The Li clan hopes that even if you fight to the death and stand as the last person, you will never be able to get out of there. Li Zhaohong roared with red eyes and stood up slowly. His eyes were full of fighting spirit. Zhang Tianji stood on the city wall and looked at Elder Guanjian and the Red Spirit King above the clouds, in the distance breath, and then raised his head to his eyes. He said slowly and firmly that the Li clan must coexist with the saint. The dead saint is the last hope of our Li clan. The Li clan is heading for destruction. After today, Xuanwang will all come out in the 5 Li clans. His voice was like thunder that turned into endless sound waves. Hot tears flowed from Li Xiao Wenyan's eyes in his hands. Li Xiao and the Li clan saint coexist and die. He roared and attacked with the sword again. Cutting through the dark clouds, this sword carried with it the Li clan's 200,000 years of reluctance and the Li clan's 200,000 years of humiliation. The fierce sword energy tore through the clouds and pierced the sky. A cold light flashed in King Kai Ling's eyes, and he raised his hand towards the sword light with his backhand. Li Xiao's sword light was extinguished, but King Kai Ling let him let out a muffled groan and only saw a scratch on his arm. The scars on the bones were very visible, and the red blood flowed like a spring. His expression was extremely embarrassed, able to injure his Juji body. Such a talent is really extraordinary. If he were not from the Li clan, he would never have been able to break through to the Juji Pavilion, and even the chairman. I, Li Chun, lived and died with the Li clan and the holy girl for a while. The people roared, their eyes red. They were weak in cultivation, but no one backed down. The Li clan had been defeated for too long, was not a strong person in the Li clan. But now finally, when the true genius of the Li clan arrived, they had broken through to the innate realm after only 3 months of cultivating the divine burial in the future. When will the Li clan really stand up to truly live with dignity? However, the various wealthy families did not give this opportunity at all. Everyone held their breath. In their hearts were only 1,000 miles away. They always give in, and they are tolerant. But what they get in return for their patience is not the respect of others, but the respect of others. This time they can't stand it anymore. The last chance for the Li clan's revival lies entirely with the Saint Tang Qianchen. Zhang Tianji roared, come out. Since there will be no more Li clan in the world after today, then you guys. Everyone hid their heads and showed their tails. Didn't you want to wipe out the Li clan from the black and yellow earth? At least let us die and clear the clouds. A figure appeared. It was a woman. Let me make you understand. Then several figures appeared. All of them were the famous divine burial emperors. This axe. It goes without saying that no one could stop Li Xiao from despair, but the fighting spirit in his eyes did not diminish at all, It was a life worth living to feel the power of the divine burial mirror in front of him died. Then he cast his gaze on the saint. The eyes on his body were a little dim. The holy girl was in the Li clan. This is the fortune of the Li clan, but it is your misfortune that you were not born in our Li clan. You can definitely become the Purple Axe Divine King or even the Yuanshan Heavenly Human in the future. I apologize to the Li clan. Li Xiao has protected the Li clan for 179 years, and has protected tens of millions of people in the Li clan, but I don't want to be unable to protect you. Li Xiao's face was full of shame, and he looked at Tang Qianshan and said, apologized, you don't need to apologize. Li clan, I have never regretted it. I will go out now. Maybe things will turn around and you will not die. Then she was about to rush out, but Li Xiao directly grabbed Tang Qianshan's hand and at the same time conveyed his spiritual thoughts and said, after the war begins, you will use this great teleportation talisman to escape. If you don't become a purple axe, don't come back. Tang Qianshan was stunned and stared at the talisman in her hand. It was a great teleportation talisman. Once crushed, it could be instantly teleported thousands of miles away. Even if the heavenly burial god wanted to find it, it would take some effort. If Tang Qianshan was lucky, she would be able to escape these people for 3 months. In these 3 months, she had already felt the care that she had never experienced in the past 10 years. She knew that these people cared about her and protected her. From the bottom of her heart, she knew what it meant to the Li clan because she could see that everyone in the Li clan's eyes were full of hope. And hope when they saw her practicing so hard, almost forgetting to eat and sleep, and then she was implanted with the eternal heaven in 3 months. Let me out. Tang Qianshan cried and said, thank you Elder Li, for taking care of her for the past 3 months. Months flashed through her mind. When she first saw Li Changying, she was so beautiful that she looked like a goddess from the Moon Palace. However, when she woke up, Li Changying had already returned to her usual appearance. Although she was beautiful and extraordinary, she had no cultivation at all. She only thought that she was going to starve to death and had hallucinations. In an instant, Tang Qianshan rushed out. When Li Xiao saw this scene, her eyes widened and she shouted, don't do it. Then a palm appeared out of nowhere and intercepted Tang Qianshan's hand. Was the Saint Li Zhu on her shoulder a group of ants? Tang Qianshan was stunned. Looking down her arm, she saw a woman who looked like a goddess from the Nine. Tang Qianshan's eyes widened in disbelief. Big brother, this time it's not an illusion. This is not a dream. Li Changying nodded with a smile and went back. Then Tang Qianshan felt a gentle energy coming from her. Then her whole body felt like the world was spinning. The next moment, she appeared on the city wall. Li Xiao saw this scene. It was really unbelievable. She had seen Li Changying a few times. At least he should be a strong backer. When Li Xiao saw this scene, she shouted quickly. Go back and take the saintess away. You are not their opponent. We use the city formation to stop them. Not being able to see through Li Changying does not mean that Li Changying can defeat so many powerful people. At this time, Zhang Tianji came. Don't say anything. Watch carefully. Her Majesty the Goddess will kill all the enemies who attack. Stand there. As she climbed the stone steps in the void, the aura on her body became stronger with each step. After that, her entire body was enveloped in light, making it impossible to see her face all this time. Li Zhu said with a strong and cold voice from the radiance. From a distance, the key elder Wan Ziwang and the others felt Li Changying's aura. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the aura around his body also fully bloomed. Who is your Majesty? Judging from your strength, it should be a divine burial scene, just like us. Why is someone who is not Li Zhu defending Li Zhu? The elder said coldly as he spoke. The long sword in his hand rang. However, Li Changying did not answer his key words. Instead, he asked Xin Zhu who would punish Wan Ji. In the whole world, is it possible for the king to lead his troops? Is the crime of the king's minister Li Zhu the crime of the East China Sea royal family? Li Changying said coldly and then punched. Today. When the time comes, I will trample on you and the other tribes. After that, I will go to the East China Sea. Wang Cheng looked for the East China Sea king and asked finally. Then a full shadow covering the Emperor of Heaven condensed and headed towards the elders, Qi and others with the strongest killing power. Everyone saw this scene. His eyes were full of horror. This man looked ordinary, but he did not expect that he was so strong. This punch actually gave him a sense of extraordinary power, as if the entire Emperor of Heaven was moving towards him. The Magic King. The next moment, the key elder concentrated his mana and slashed the sky with a sword, heading towards the entire shadow. The others also stepped forward and released their own methods. When the shadow collided, the clouds within a radius of 100 miles were blown away, and endless aftereffects rippled throughout the distance. The defensive formation above the distance was fully activated, the runes lit up, and the entire city began to shake. My god, how could this happen? Li Xiao was stunned when he saw this scene. How could such a powerful person be able to fight against more than a dozen heavenly burial gods, and even be able to compete evenly with him? Even the Zifu Divine Lord could only do this, right? On the other hand, Zhang Tianji, who was standing by the side, was stunned. The old deputy god was sure to win, as if everything that happened here was normal. The elder looked very embarrassed. Who are you? It is impossible for Li Zhu to have such a powerful person. I thought that this time, more than a dozen of them, heavenly burial gods, would take action to be easily captured, but he did not expect a mysterious strong man to appear. A dozen of them, heavenly burial god kings, could talk evenly when they joined forces. It's good that he can take my punch. How could you turn into a divine light in the next second and rush towards a group of Shenzong Tianjin? The void trembled slightly, and it seemed that his physical body could not bear it anymore. His speed was as fast as lightning, flint, and explosion. The buried god. Tianjin had no time to react and was blown to pieces by his punch. You are the key elder who slaughtered the Zhao family in Zhao Haizhou. Seeing this scene, his eyes widened in horror. He exclaimed in shock. It was rumored that the mysterious woman who slaughtered the Zhao family was a strong person Li Zhu had heard of before. After all, this matter was so big that even the East China Sea royal family had ordered to hunt down Li Changying. But he ignored it without hesitation. He turned around and fled in fear. Damn it, Li Zhu. How could a strong person like Xiax's mirror appear? He was the cruel person who slaughtered the entire Zhao family in Zhao Haizhou, Zhou Mu, and the Zhao Zhu family could only produce one genius. Only a mature genius would arouse their fear. Li Zhu was still a group of ants that they could easily crush to death. The man in the mirror had to report this matter to the East China Sea royal family so that the East China Sea royal family could deal with Li Zhu. But when he looked back, he was so scared that his shield almost flew in the air and he could no longer stabilize his body. All I saw was that Li Changying's entire body was enveloped in endless light, and he was like a comet, drawing white marks one after another in the void of the heavenly sovereign. Burial was not his alien core enemy. He spread his hands and rushed over, and the divine burial gods were hit, their bodies shattered, and their blood-red feathers spread to the ground, even more frightened to the extreme, losing all their previous arrogance. They all scattered and fled. Li Changying's speed was extremely fast. Now that he had caught all the fish, he would definitely not let go of any of the divine burial heavenly gods who dominated a continent. He killed him so much that he couldn't even escape. My god, he was still a human. He thought he was sure of victory this time, but he didn't expect more than a dozen heavenly burial gods to join forces, but instead of the mysterious and powerful alien core enemy, he was so terrifying that he turned around without anything. He fled, but Li Changying stared at him and smashed him to pieces with a snap of his fingers. The people of the Kailing tribe on the ground saw it. My own imperial capital has fallen. I knelt on the ground and kept begging for mercy and worshipping Li Changying who was above the sky. King Wanji was extremely frightened when he saw this scene. Li Changying's speed was too fast. He had no chance to escape. He gritted his teeth and gathered all the power around him to punch out. The Emperor's immortal fist, the spring shadow, swept across the sky with endless waves. With such power, a giant mountain thousands of feet high could be directly shattered into pieces. The long human face reached the eight-haired spider shadow, let out a deafening roar. The void was turbulent. Li Changying raised his eyes coldly, and then displayed a huge spring shadow, directly destroying the giant. The eight-haired spider shadow also turned into dust in the treatment room at this moment. At the same time, a huge subtle energy directly penetrated the body. 10,000 kings without any loss, and then hit a building more than 10 miles away. A huge roar came from the hundreds of feet high mountain. With horror, the high mountain peak was instantly wiped out, as if a 9-day god holding a divine sword slashed it with one sword. After doing all this, Li Changying continued to kill the other fugitives from a distance with his eyes wide open, and his heart became more and more disturbed. He did not expect that Li Zhu had such supreme power. Tang Qianqun was also stunned, so powerful, but she did not want to kill more than a dozen buried heavenly immortals in a row. The aura around his body was like a god and a devil, and he was extremely powerful. He saw this scene, although he had already known about this scene. The battle must be without suspense, but when he saw Li Changying's methods, he was also frightened. For millions of years, Li Zhu's supreme power when they were at their peak. At his peak, he was a peerless existence at the level of the great sage. The Li Zhu tribe on the ground saw this scene, they danced excitedly. The sky has eyes. I, Li Zhu, can finally stand up from now on. We can finally hold our heads high and live upright in the Shuangwang realm. Countless Li Zhu clan members were extremely excited. They had been bullied and humiliated by other races since they were born. It had penetrated into their marrow and soul. But now they finally resurrected again. They were killed by Li Zhu's supreme power today. This power shows that they have completely risen. At this time, Li Changying has also killed all the gods. Tianjin has only one key elder left, the runner. He is really too lazy to chase. Anyway, he can run. The monk can't run away from the temple. After 2 days, he will go and slaughter the Moon Sword Pavilion and let the entire East China Sea area go. Everyone knows that Li Zhu has risen again. With him, Li Changying will be invincible from now on. Anyone who dares to provoke will be killed. Zhang Tianji was so excited that he cried Her Majesty the Goddess. There are countless people among them. Li Changying, who was as cold as the goddess of the Moon Palace, was overjoyed. They all bowed down to worship each other. In the 834,923rd year of the Zhanhuang calendar, there were clouds and mist on the 1,000-foot-high mountains. There were loft buildings one after another. The entire mountain was like a magic sword soaring into the sky. If there was a sword cultivator here, he would definitely feel the strong sword energy here. Located in the Guangjian district of Yujian Mountain, it was very leisurely, like walking in the clouds. When I came back, my hair was scattered and there was still a trace of blood on my body. The aura rose and fell, like a pavilion in the consciousness hall of Yujian Pavilion. Master Zhangjian was discussing with other sect elders. The Yaoqi secret realm was about to open and it was his 1000th birthday. If he had broken through the Yuanshan realm, my East China Sea would also become an upper realm. You can tell. At that time, what should we send to the hidden sword master? Rewards. Only a region with powerful gods and celestial beings can be called an upper realm. The gods and celestial beings are so powerful that they can mobilize the vitality of heaven and earth. The entire East China Sea region rose to a higher level, and can directly become a sacred place of spiritual practice in several nearby areas. However, such an important sacrament must be given as a gift to the sea in the East China Sea region and become the Yuanshan Tian. When the time comes, there will be a banquet for the gods and humans, especially for his 1000-year birthday. Why don't we send half of the heavenly treasures we got before? The great elder held the sword and asked, I heard it. After the great elder's words, the hidden sword master's mouth twitched slightly. There was something he found 300 years ago in the cave of the Zifu God King. In these 300 years, he will successfully refine it and become a divine treasure. When the time comes, he can respect Yanlong. It is not unacceptable for him to give it for such an occasion. But if he does not give this treasure, there will be no treasures to be obtained in the entire Moon Sword Pavilion. As for Tianbao, although these things are placed outside, it is enough for Shenzong Tianjin to fight for it, but now things are different from the nearby 10 realms. If you send such things, I am afraid that you will definitely encounter some difficulties and stay. Bad impression. This matter is very important. Should we consider it in the long term? This time, a genius had emerged from the Li clan. It was them, the Yan Longzhou sect. Given that the Li clan was a sinful clan, the Li clan might be able to gain favor by capturing this clan's genius and sending him to the East China Sea King City as a tribute to the royal clan. The Li clan was not strong. For Shenzong Tianjin, Guangjian should also be brought along to calculate the time to stop the attack. The Li clan had returned, right? As he was thinking about it, Guangjian rushed in from outside in a panic. Something bad was going to happen. Master Kangjian frowned after hearing this from the clan that had snatched him. Didn't we agree that the genius should be placed in the Yujian Pavilion and presented to me at the same time? Guangjian's face became stern when he heard this. They are all dead. The mysterious strong man who slaughtered the Zhao family before was a member of the Li clan. The hidden sword master heard this and was stunned for a moment. Did you say that the Zhao family of Zhao Haizhou slaughtered Zhao? Mysterious woman. Which of those families is from the Li clan? Everyone who surrounded and suppressed the Li clan this time is dead except for his enemy in Yihei. He should be the purple axe god. Guangjian nodded solemnly. There was still a look of fear in his eyes that had not disappeared. If he ran any slower, he would die. His eyes were wide open in horror. There was a turmoil in his heart. How old is he? The purple axe is dead. The Li clan is not a continuous caster. Master Zhangjian is also very scared. The Zhangtianjin god can live for 1,000 years. He is already more than 890 years old this year. Only 100 years can survive him. Who slaughtered the Zhao clan is still very young, probably less than 500 years old. Even if he is less than 500 years old, in the purple axe realm, he should be in the forefront even if he is on the Qianlong list. Thinking that the other party is from the Li clan, it is unreasonable. He is still guessing whether the other party is a reincarnation goddess or a sword-catching saint. It is really outrageous if the other party is from the Li clan. Does not know, but I think her age should be around 500 years old. Yi Neijian shook his head and slowly said that the 500-year-old hidden sword master Wen Yan is even more shocking than the East China Sea, who has broken through the Yuanshan Tianren and has not returned, only broke through the purple when he was over 500 years old. The Axe realm is almost on the Qianlong list of such a strong man before. Who is his father and who is his mother? The elder holding the sword couldn't help but ask. And he is still in the cultivation of the purple axe. I am afraid that our Moon Sword Pavilion will not be able to resist it. Elder Guangjian said solemnly to the side. This matter must be too big. I can't hide it, every strong member of the Li clan will definitely take revenge. Although we, the Moon Sword Pavilion, never take action against the Li clan on weekdays, this time the Li clan sent the purple axe, and we have also taken action. This must not be an easy end for the sword-wielding elder, please do it immediately. Go to the East China Sea King City to inform the East China Sea royal family about this matter, and ask them to send people to suppress the woman. Elder Guanjian, Wen Yan, nodded. He also thought so. East China Sea King City. It was hundreds of thousands of miles away. Even if he had cultivated the heavenly burial god, it would still take a few days to rush over. I am afraid that the 10,000-year-old foundation of Yujian Pavilion will no longer exist in the East China Sea Empire. This is a city that spans thousands of miles, extremely large and magnificent. From a distance, it looks like an ancient giant beast nesting here. People everywhere in the city are monks with cultivation skills. There are some rare and exotic beasts, including a white horse covered with bells and a single horn, a bear and a 3-foot-tall lion with flames burning on its body. At this time, he just wants to spread the news of Li Zhu quickly. If it were in the past, he would definitely stop and watch for a while. The China Sea has not returned from the Yaoqi secret realm. The news he sent back has made it a sure thing to penetrate the soul, so that the vast area nearby. All the monks came to participate in this grand event for the return of the Donghai king a year later. Not long ago, he came to the center of the royal city. There is a mansion covering dozens of miles. The entire royal city is surrounded by this palace built here, where the Tang family of the East China Sea royal family is located. Rumor has it that the East China Sea royal family was originally just a rich sea snake in the East China Sea. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the founder of the Tang family had the opportunity to defy the heavens and rebel against their ancestors. It had been nearly 200,000 years since the Tang family rose completely to dominate the East China Sea. The sword-wielding elder looked at a dragon made of 9-colored glass in the open space in front of the mansion, with a very solemn expression on his face. In his perception, he only felt that the 9-colored glazed dragon did not seem to be made of glass at all, but a living creature. Even the faint coercive aura coming from the flag made him feel a kind of palpitations. Of colored glaze could not be defeated. Sure enough, he had a royal aura. The sword-wielding elder thought in his heart that this was the second time he had come to the East China Sea King City, following the previous pavilion master to participate in the East China Sea region's genius competition. It was also the moment when he saw how big the world was. When he was young, he was one of the best in Yanlongzhou when he saw Tianzhao, but he didn't want to even be able to take a sword from the Tianzhao of the Tang family in that competition. He was in the same realm and had the same cultivation level. Who came after being defeated? The slave guarding the gate stopped him with a proud expression on his face and asked in a cold voice, Yanlongzhou, the great elder of the Moon Sword Pavilion, brought important news and hoped to see the sword master. He said respectfully that he was defeated 500 years ago. The sword master at that time was ranked 99th on the Qianlong ranking. It was also the moment when he truly realized how big the gap between himself and the geniuses on the Qianlong ranking was. 500 years later, he was still wasting his time in the divine burial mirror of the East China Sea royal family's fossils. The East China Sea king did not rule the entire East China Sea region. The other party had broken through to the Zifu realm 300 years ago. Waiting for the slaves. He was an assistant in cultivation, but his attitude was extremely arrogant. He didn't even pay attention to him as a god. He just left a few words and turned to leave. Slaves, go out and come with me. Sword master, I want to see you. Shi Jian nodded and followed the slave respectfully. His heart became more and more shocked. Everyone who was seen, at least anyone with innate cultivation, can be considered a strong person in the outside world. If Li Zhu did not have Li Changying, the strongest person was only Shantian Jing. But here he could only be a slave, and the cultivation of the guards was all helping, even Shenzong Liang. I don't know how many attics I passed as I walked. The slave said this, he turned and left. Shi Jian took a deep breath and walked in. Holding a sword in the Yu Sword Pavilion, he saw the sword master, a handsome middle-aged man drinking tea leisurely. On both sides of the meeting hall, 4 god generals wearing god armor stood motionless like statues, but their auras were as vague as smoke. China Sea competition, you are my third opponent. The middle-aged man said slowly to Shi Jian. How could he make the sword master remember that it was a blessing for 3 lifetimes? That. The sword master nodded and said in a calm tone. Li Zhu appeared in Yanlongzhou. A strong man with a purple axe mirror slaughtered many racial sects in Yanlongzhou. Shi Jian said respectfully, Li Zhu is a villain, right? The sword master put down the teacup in his hand and looked at Shi Jian. After hearing this, Shi Jian stared closely at his opponent's eyes and couldn't help but turn his head. The Dragon Slayer guard team went to Yanlongzhou to exterminate Li's pawn. The sword master nodded and said, for him, how could the purple axe mirror not cultivate into the soul? The sword master turned his attention to Shi Jian again and nodded. Yan Longzhou will be in charge of you from now on. When Shi Jian heard this, ecstasy appeared on his face. Zhang must be the guardian of the royal family. The sword master Yan Long heard this. The subordinate nodded and withdrew. Shi Jian bowed again and turned to leave. The sword master's aura was too terrifying. He felt that 500 years ago, the sword master would need a sword to defeat him, but now maybe they only need to move their fingers, but after 500 years, the situation of the two of them has been reversed. The power of the years is really amazing. But with the support of the sword master, Shokan, Yanlong will belong to their moon sword pavilion. This is a good thing for Li Zhu, he didn't think about it at all. If the sword master sent the 8th god general with Zanlong, then Li Zhu would definitely be destroyed.